When you think about the end of the Soviet Union, what comes to mind? Probably the Berlin Wall coming down, right? Or maybe all the political drama of 1991. But what if we looked at it differently? What if we treated the Soviet economy like a patient on an operating table? In this explainer, we're going to do just that. We're performing an autopsy to figure out the real, deep-seated causes of death that brought a superpower to its knees.
So picture this. It's 1985. Mikhail Gorbachev is the new guy in charge. But he isn't inheriting some booming empire. No, he's basically being handed the keys to a machine that's been rusting for decades. It's creaky, inefficient, and honestly, it's already broken. For all intents and purposes, the patient was already on life support.
And that leads us to the big question, doesn't it? What pulled the plug? Was this a terminal illness from the very beginning? Was it a series of botched reforms, bad surgeries, if you will? Or did a perfect storm of outside shocks just finish the job? Well, today we're going to sift through the evidence and try to find an answer. Okay, first things first. Before you can treat a patient, you have to diagnose the problem. And Gorbachev, he had a diagnosis. He believed there was a fundamental issue holding the entire country back, something he called the braking mechanism.
So what was his prescription? Well, it came in two parts. Part one, for the diagnosis, was glasnost, which means openness. The idea was pretty radical. Let people speak up, let them criticize, so we can finally see all the corruption and the problems that are hiding in the system. And once all that was out in the open, then came part two, the cure, perestroika, a total restructuring of the economy.
And you can hear it from the man himself. Gorbachev said perestroika was all about breaking down the braking mechanism. I mean, what a great way to put it. He saw the Soviet system as this massive machine, but a machine that was trying to drive with the emergency brake pulled up, just totally stifled by bureaucracy. And look, the numbers don't lie. This is the hard data behind what was called the era of stagnation. Now, these numbers show production compared to the year before. So anything under 100 means you're actually going backwards. And check out 1985, the year Gorbachev took over. Petroleum, down. Steel, down. Even watches. The entire economy was shrinking. The engine wasn't just slowing down, it was starting to sputter and die.
All right, so Gorbachev had his diagnosis, he had his prescription. But, as we're about to see, the cure he dished out, perestroika, well, let's just say it had some serious side effects. In a lot of ways, it only made things worse and faster.
Now, this restructuring didn't just happen overnight. You can really think of it as a four-act play. It started with simple calls to just work a little harder, then moved on to some really radical reforms, which then spiraled into total chaos, and finally, a desperate last-ditch effort to build a market economy. This was the roadmap from hope to total failure. That second phase, radical reform, this is where things really started to go off the rails. The goals, they sounded great. Let's decentralize, let's legalize private businesses, give people a reason to work hard. But the reality? It was a catastrophe. They started tearing down the old command system before they had anything to replace it. And the result? By 1988, they were rationing food. By 1990, poverty was soaring. The cure was literally making the patient sicker.
So by the time they made it official in 1991 and declared an end to the planned economy, it was almost a meaningless gesture. The system wasn't being guided anymore. It was in an uncontrolled free fall. It was like trying to steer a plane that was already in a nosedive. Now, while all this was happening, while the attempted cure was failing, the Soviet economy was also suffering from some major pre-existing conditions. It was basically bleeding out resources from two huge self-inflicted wounds, a disastrous war and an unwinnable arms race.
The war in Afghanistan, which dragged on for a decade, became the Soviet Union's Vietnam, and it's a perfect comparison. It was a brutal, incredibly expensive, and deeply unpopular guerrilla war that they just couldn't win. It was draining the country of money, supplies, and morale.
Just think about this number for a second. Over 100,000 troops. And that's not just people. That's tanks, fuel, guns, food, an entire slice of the country's industrial power being funneled into a foreign war, all while people back home were struggling to find basic goods on store shelves.
The historian Eric Hobsbawm put it perfectly. He wrote that the endless confrontation with the U.S. was hemorrhaging the economy. Hemorrhaging. I mean, that word just paints such a vivid picture, doesn't it? A slow, steady bleeding out of resources, all in an effort to keep up with a much, much wealthier rival. So, on top of all these long-term problems, the already weak Soviet system was about to get hit by a series of sudden, devastating shocks.
It was a perfect storm that it just wasn't equipped to handle.
It was just one body blow after another. In '86, you have the Chernobyl disaster, a catastrophe that not only cost billions, but also exposed just how rotten the system was. At the exact same time, global oil prices tanked, which was a huge deal because oil was one of the government's main sources of cash. And then, in '88, a massive earthquake hits Armenia, killing 25,000 people, and putting even more strain on a budget that was already at its breaking point.
And listen to what Gorbachev himself said. Chernobyl opened my eyes like nothing else. This really shows you that these weren't just line items on a budget anymore. These were moments of truth that proved to the people in charge that huge, radical change wasn't just an idea, it was a matter of survival.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got a chronic illness, stagnation. We've got a failed cure, perestroika. And we've got a series of massive external shocks. All of this comes together for the final act, the moment when economic chaos tips over into total political collapse.
And this leads us to one of the most brilliantly named policies in modern history, the Sinatra Doctrine. In 1989, the Soviet Union basically told all of its Eastern European satellite states that from now on, they could do it their way. It was a jaw-dropping admission that they just couldn't afford their own empire anymore.
The name actually came from this witty comment by a Soviet spokesman, but behind the joke was a deadly serious reality. The economic bleeding was so bad that the Kremlin had to just let go. The empire was dissolving because its economic heart was failing.
So, we come to the end of our autopsy, and we're left with this huge question. Was the Soviet command economy doomed from the start? Was it a patient with a fatal genetic flaw that was always going to fail? Or was it a system that could have survived, but was ultimately killed by a perfect storm of bad medicine, terrible shocks, and just plain bad luck? The evidence, as we've seen, points to a bit of both, leaving a question that we're still trying to fully answer today.